everything we wanted to. So I'm going to share my screen real quick and get started on this presentation. If folks, some of you were here last night and saw this presentation, it's a little bit different, but please feel free to ask any questions throughout the presentation, put them in the chat or intervene, and we'll get started here. So Dutch Kills Loop, for those, I think everyone has some familiarity, right? No one's like coming at this totally from scratch. So I don't have to, speak like this is a brand new crowd. So Dutch Kills Loop, the name of the project, that is also something we can actually discuss if we want to rebrand where we're at here. But I'll give a little bit of history of the area and then jump into the history of the project and what we're hoping to achieve. So for those unfamiliar, Dutch Kills is the name of the tributary of Newtown Creek. It's of course also a name of a small pocket of neighborhood in Long Island City. And it's connected to Newtown Creek, which flows out to the East River. It's a pretty interesting waterway in the sense that it's very sort of narrow and confined by the shorelines. It has a number of bridges that cross it, including 2 rail bridges, one of which is part of this project, the Borden Avenue Bridge, the LIE, and Hunters Point Avenue. And it has, unfortunately, currently no real public access to the waterway. You can see it from the bridges, you can see it from the private properties that border the waterway, but that's about it. Very stagnant waters. It is, after a rain event, very polluted here because of the amount of combined sewage that gets dumped in through a number of pipes, primarily through one of the larger CSO pipes that's at the very head of the waterway. So that's a major problem. There are plans to reduce the amount of sewage overflow in Dutch Kills by about 70%, and that will be completed, I believe, in the next about 10 years is what the timeline is for that project, which is actually really great news because the rest of Newtown Creek does not have that, is going to get a reduction that's going to take much, much longer to achieve. So that is really kind of exciting news for this waterway. It is also, this number here, this is million gallons a year. So over 160 million gallons a year of untreated sewage currently. It's also it's part of Newtown Creek, and Newtown Creek is a federal Superfund site. So there are elevated levels of chemicals in the sediments at the bottom of the creek. We can talk more about that. And the whole site is surrounded by industrial uses. And we're actually going to get into that a little bit because that's a really sort of significant consideration when we're talking about outreach, stakeholders, participation in this project, understanding the context that it's within, and how this project will hopefully really benefit the people that are there on a day-to-day basis in the area. Just a really quick timeline of this project. This really began, certainly as May pointed out, a number of people were familiar with the Dutch Kills tributary and things like the Montauk Cutoff rail line before 2015, but that's when the MTA put out a request for expressions of interest to find a way to transform the Montauk Cutoff, which was a rail line that they had just recently decommissioned. And it used to connect from Sunnyside Yards down to the lower Montauk Cutoff line. It's completely deactivated. There are no rail cars going over it. The rail line does also go over Newtown Creek, as I mentioned. And so Smiling Hogshead Ranch, which I'm glad we have a handful of folks there from the ranch that are here tonight, teamed up with groups like Newtown Creek Alliance and a number of other local stakeholder groups and organizations to come up with a proposal for that request. And we called it the Ranch on Rails, and formed a group called the Montauk Cutoff, the Cutoff Coalition, that submitted that to MTA. MTA was very receptive to that plan, but nothing has come about from that process. And we can sort of talk more specifics about that if folks have questions. A few years later, in 2018, Newtown Creek Alliance worked with Riverkeeper on developing a Newtown Creek vision plan for the waterway. and it is a very large plan that we put out and has over 80 different projects that we would like to see throughout the creek. And when we looked at the Dutch Kills tributary, obviously the Montauk Cutoff was in the Ranch on Rails proposal was a very obvious thing that we wanted to incorporate and also expand upon. So we took what was the Ranch on Rails, which was focused just on the rail line, and grew it into this bigger vision of an entire loop to have open space, public access to the water, so on and so forth. And that's essentially it. We sort of Newtown Creek Alliance took over a leadership role on this project as it's transformed. We launched a website last year, and we also, despite the pandemic, have started doing some more activities around the project. And that's where we are today. We just formed these two committees. There's a lot of work to be done to make this project possible. And so that is on the planning side. That's one of our committees, to understand the feasibilities of how we can work with the MTA to take over ownership of the rail line, how we can, work with the DOT or private businesses to create the access. But then there's also this really vital need for us to be doing outreach about the project. This is not going to happen if it's just, 10 people who know about it and who want it to happen. We need to grow this group and do that in a way that is, strategic and in line with the values that we all want to see happen with this project. So we're very excited for you all to join this outreach committee for that purpose. Here's just this is a view. This is a rendering from the vision plan, and it has a lot of these different elements. I said the Montauk Cutoff here, ideas about a new pedestrian bridge, about shoreline access, this area called Bernie's Walk, named after NCA's late historian, Bernie Enty. 29th Street, which is near LaGuardia, creating access to the water there. More improvements, pedestrian improvements, things like that. So there's a number of elements. We're not really going to get into a lot of the nuts and bolts about these specifics. That's kind of the work of the other committee. But we do suffice to say, this plan that we have here, and this is kind of like a really important thing to understand, this was a vision, and it was not based on feasibilities or cost or anything else that would make it a reality or prevent it from ever happening. So the stage that we're at now is that we want to transform from going from just this big picture pie in the sky vision to really making this happen. And so understanding what are the priorities, what are the nuts and bolts that we need to do this. So it's just one thing that we want to incorporate, is that we do want to hear ideas that are outside the box and are new to this. And this is a fluid process. So what we see on the screen here is not, like, we are not married to this by any means. This is not going to be the final product. This needs to be updated and reflect the realities that we establish and achieve. So a few photos for those who are maybe less familiar with the area. These are some photos of the waterway itself. This is taken from one of the LaGuardia buildings, the head end here where there used to be a turning basin for boats. Down on the bottom, that's that same area, some of the water quality sampling that we do with LaGuardia. This is the Borden Avenue Bridge. This is a group from the North Brooklyn Boat Club out on a canoe trip doing some bird watching. That's another sort of interesting element, is that although it's designated for marine traffic, the rail bridge at the mouth is rusted shut. So you basically have a very hard time getting a boat that is taller than this canoe into the waterway. So it creates a very different environment than the rest of Newtown Creek, where there's very heavy barge and tug traffic. These are some photos from Nate Kinzinger of the cutoff itself. There are a few places where you can get up there from the right-of-way. It is not legal, I'll just say that for folks that are on the meeting, to be up there, but there are ways to get up there. So these are just some different shots of the rail line. This is sort of where this is the crossing over Newtown Creek from the rail bridge. This is another crossing up here on the top right, going over Borden Avenue. So there are a number of bridge structures that are part of the rail, and then obviously it goes underneath the LIE and actually kind of low to the LIE. So it's a very interesting kind of like different dynamics with how the space exists. It's not just sort of one linear path. It's really uniform. There's different elements of it, and then this is sort of more the connection from Smiling Hogshead Ranch to the rail line as well. This is the area near 29th Street. And we have been, this is one of the developments working with LaGuardia. They have a program called the President Society of the Environment, which is very well represented here tonight with Ryan, Holly, and Joby, and are looking specifically at these areas around the college in 29th Street, both on this section and the northern section, and ways to turn those into public spaces that can be actually benefit, can actually have an outdoor campus for the thousands of students that come to the college during non-pandemic times. So this shore, though, is in really bad state. There's these sunken barges here, a lot of work and a lot of potential. And then just real quick, I want to breeze through this so we can get to sort of more of the outreach. But these are the project objectives that we kind of established in our steering committee group for the Dutch Kills Loop going forward. And we don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but I think it, hopefully will provide a little bit of guidance of what the main goals and objectives are. And the first is water access and shoreline remediation. I'll mention that the city, the DEP, has already started doing some shoreline restoration in the form of salt marshes as a pilot project a few years ago. And that's certainly something we would like to see expanded. Open space obviously is one of the main things, specifically on the cutoff. There's a significant potential and a real need for having open space in this very heavy urban area with multiple uses, from students that are coming here every day, light manufacturing uses, heavy industrial uses, so on and so forth. Urban ag and gardening, that certainly came a lot out of the Cutoff Coalition and the proposal we put together, that a lot of that was kind of seen as an extension of Smiling Hogshead Ranch. And there's a lot of interest in continuing that. So thinking about how we're going to incorporate those elements into this space is certainly one worth considering. And the other part of that is a sort of like green industry. So thinking about how we have a project that is not, that is complementary in many ways to the zoning of the area, and finding beneficial jobs that we can incorporate into this project, not just for the sake of sustainability and ecological benefit, but also as a model as to how we can have industrial spaces that are providing benefit to the community and the planet as a whole. And then lastly, green infrastructure and stormwater management. We talked about the impacts that stormwater has on the quality of water in Newtown Creek and the Dutch Kills tributary. And so there's a lot of focus we want to have about green infrastructure that also provides all these ecological benefits in terms of habitat, air quality improvement, et cetera. Any questions so far on the background? Okay, so real quick, this is where we are right now, Dutch Kills Loop. We, as I mentioned, Newtown Creek Alliance is the sort of head of this entity for now, and our steering committee is composed of folks: Gil from Smiling Hogshead, Wendy from Green Map, Benedict and Marlisa from Interval Projects, and Joby just joined us. And so we're working on getting the LaGuardia logo on here as well. Very excited about that. This is just more information about the vision plan that we did with Riverkeeper and Perkins and Will. And we're also part of the Highline Network, which is now known as the Public Space Coalition. So we've actually been able to connect with a lot of other projects, not just in the city, but around the nation, that are doing creative, adaptive reuse of infrastructure assets like the Montauk Cutoff and Dutch Kills Loop. And then lastly, this slide, these are all the entities that had signed on as a supporter of our Ranch on Rails proposal back in 2016. And so one of the things that we are here to talk about tonight as part of the outreach committee is not just re-engaging with some of these folks, and we can talk about those different relationships. Some we've maintained very well and have remained, sort of involved in the conversations. Others kind of just signed on to this proposal, and we could certainly do a lot to reestablish connections with them. But essentially, we want to update this list with a new list of people that support the Dutch Kills Loop project as an entity. But also, aside from just having their endorsement, we need to find ways that we're working with elected officials, local businesses is a major one, community-based organizations, even citywide organizations that have relevancy here, in a fashion that utilizes what they have to offer and bring to this project and make it a reality. So we want to make this more of a broad coalition moving forward, so there is sort of a groundswell of movement for it, and hopefully once enough people buy into the plan that we are developing, it'll be easier to go out and raise funds to make this a reality. So specific to tonight, we're gonna get into the using Miro Board, and we didn't say this at the beginning, but if you don't have a Miro Board account, please create one so that you can participate. It's not required. We're gonna share a screen and you can certainly chime in verbally, but if you want to add notes and things like that, I think we'll probably putting a link in the chat here to do that. But we're going to get started a little bit with the Miro Board. And one of the things we're going to talk about is, outreach in the context of the neighborhood that we're within, and what our sort of immediate goals are in terms of growing this project. So this map, thank you, Benedict. I assume Benedict did the majority of the work on this for putting this together. And there's a few different maps we'll look at, but this one's pretty straightforward. Parks in the area, community gardens, NYCHA developments, and transportation options. And, there's, again, this is very much a work in progress. So there's certainly more assets or entities we could be adding to this to better get a sort of complete picture of the area. We could be looking at cultural institutions, things like that. Other organizations we could put on here. Some demographics in these two zip codes. You can see that 62% identify as non-white, which is certainly something to consider for our group going forward of who's involved and who is a stakeholder in this project. There's also these sort of dynamics of being in an industrial zone where there's lots of people that are coming there day to day. What are the typical employee relationships to this area? What are their desires to see happen here? But then also, how do we interface with the residential areas, be it Sunnyside or other, western side of Long Island City, or Blissville, which is kind of a little bit cut off on this map. How do we engage with those residential populations as well? Of course, Queensbridge houses, largest public housing development in the country, is very nearby, and LaGuardia Community College, as we've mentioned, is a significant partner that we want to engage more with on this project. Lastly, we didn't really talk about this a lot last night, but Sunnyside Yards, the city, the EDC have been talking about these major plans for a huge redevelopment of the Sunnyside Yards. There hasn't been a lot of progress on that recently, probably in large part due to COVID, but it's certainly a good idea for us to keep an eye on that development, and not act like it doesn't exist, despite what our opinions of it may be. This is a zoning map All the purple is manufacturing zones, which you can see are very significant around Newtown Creek in general, but also this Dutch Kills tributary. Of course, the majority of this is the Sunnyside Yards itself, but also this very significant section on both sides of the tributary here. And there are, LaGuardia, aviation, all these other schools are located within this industrial zone as well, which is very important to note. I would say there's been major developments that have happened on the East River side of Long Island City here, and some of that, well, I guess that would be there. Some maybe expanding as well, but a huge influx in population in that area specifically in recent years. And lastly, this is a map of an EJ environmental justice map, and this is interesting for a few reasons. One, this is the city's map. The state also has a potential environmental justice areas map, and one, this is still being developed, and so the city just put this out recently and have had some meetings with various stakeholders about ways to improve their environmental justice designations. Primarily, this is based on race and income in the areas. And one of the concerns that we have raised, and it's based on census data. And so one of the issues that we've sort of had is that it doesn't accurately reflect, it's very geared towards residential zones. So it doesn't actually reflect industrial areas. And obviously there's sort of reason for that if no one's living there. But, the idea that there are areas around here that are, I say the creek is a federal Superfund site, there are state Superfunds, cleanup programs. There's a lot of environmental hazards, environmental justice issues. You have the LIE going over, so on and so forth, that are can be very pertinent to a specific area that may not be reflected on this map. The entire Sunnyside Yards, or the significant portion of it, is a major contaminated site as well. So, there's all this to say is just because something is light blue or dark blue doesn't really tell a complete picture, I would say, in my opinion, and hopefully others share this as well, in terms of what the environmental hazards are, or what the environmental justice sort of realities are. So, but nevertheless, it's good to share in this context.